Okay, so let's start step 5. In this step 5, the goal will be to make the BalanceCard component configurable using inputs, or in other words, to allow BalanceCard to receive its data from the parent, or for the parent to send data to its child, BalanceCard. By child parent, if we take a look at our application here, if we go into Elements, so in F12, in the Web Developer Console, we see a representation of the HTML of our page, of our application. And if we scroll through it a bit, we'll see that AppRoot here contains 2 AppBalanceCard components. So here, in terms of vocabulary, we'll say that AppRoot is the parent component, and that AppBalanceCard, these 2 here, are the child components. AppBalanceCard is the child component of AppRoot, and AppRoot is the parent component of AppBalanceCard. If you remember, in step 3, by the way, if you're using IntelliJ, which I highly recommend once again, because just for the Git visualization alone, it's fantastic. You have, so in the Git tab on Mac, it's Command 9, and on Windows, it's Alt 9. That opens up this prompt here. So you can see the list of commits that have been made. If I select some commits, I can see here what was changed during that particular commit. So specifically, since in step 4 we had a section about pipes, in step 3 we had the creation of the balance card. So we can see more or less where we left off with the creation of this balance card. And we can see that we had created some variables, but in balance card they contain the value of this component. So the goal of this step 5 will be to lift this data up so that it's no longer a balance card that has the responsibility of holding the data it needs to display, but rather its parent component's responsibility. This actually allows us to introduce a new concept, which is the concept of smart and dumb components. In French, that would be intelligent components and presentation components, or in other words, components that are a bit less intelligent, let's say. The smart components are the ones that have access to data, that have access to stores, which we'll see much later, especially when we use NGRX, that have access to data, to services, logic services, API services, basically, all sorts of. That's where we'll see it. Actually, this notion of intelligence, of access to data. And the dumb components, their role is only to display the things sent to them by the parent. They will never know what data they are supposed to display. That's not their responsibility. That data will have to be retrieved by the parent component, which will then send it to them, which means that it's actually quite rare to have this concept in components, because among other things, it ends up locking in the data, the value of the label variable is basically fixed here. What we want is for this value to be dynamic, sent by the parent, and modified however we like. And ultimately, that's the goal of step 5, to use input. In particular, this notation might not seem very familiar to you if you've been using Angular for a while. This is how we used to do it before. Sorry. Label. Okay. That was the old version with an at input. Now, since the integration of Angular Signal, there's a new way to have somewhat dynamic variables on the Angular side. It's true that they've changed quite a few things in that area. In this course, where I really try to stay very up to date with Angular versions, we'll only be talking about this version. Nevertheless, the principle will remain the same. It's just the notation, just a bit of the wording that's changed. In any case, the difference is actually quite minimal. So the idea is that our app balance card will have variables that are inputs, meaning variables that allow it to receive data from the parent. So in this first part of step 5, I suggest you go back to what you had on the balance card component. I'll put it back. It'll look something a bit more or less like this. And then update the var, the value of the variables, so that they are no longer variables contained within balance card, but instead variables that use input. You have a little hint here, a file that will tell you a bit about how to use them. So your variable will be equal to all of this. So I'll let you do that for now, and we'll meet up again afterwards. Okay, so we're back to take a look at what needed to be done. I'm going to comment on it a bit. So I'm heading over there to see what I was able to change. So before we had something like this, so it was just a variable interpretation. We can see that now what's a bit different is that the inputs and more generally now, variables of type signal are displayed using a function by calling the function of that signal or that input. Ultimately, it will be a signal. We'll see that later. There's an entire section on Angular signal. But in any case, when it comes to HTML usage, the difference is actually quite simple. It's just the name of our variable, but using the call function of that signal type variable. Its overall impact on the TypeScript ecosystem is a little bit different and quite distinct in its nature. We have this option to make the component required, meaning it must be injected by its parent, or otherwise it can be nullable. But in that case, you need to properly handle this particularity in our DOM component. Since this variable can be null, you'll have to manage this aspect in the HTML and anticipate that it could be null at some point. So will you need to slightly change the display depending on whether this variable is set or not? And as for sending the variables, it's actually pretty straightforward and quite simple. This effectively allows us to have it allows the app root to now have direct access to these specific variables. And we can then proceed to send the necessary data into them in this particular manner, just like this. That's it for step 5. We'll meet again for step 5-2.